Imagine being pulled over for a routine traffic stop, only to realize that something far more sinister is unfolding. In a shocking twist, a black driver finds himself at the center of a life-altering moment when a police officer plants evidence in his car. But there's one thing the officer doesn't know. The driver has been secretly recording everything, part of a larger federal investigation. This isn't just a story about a traffic stop gone wrong. It's a glimpse into how truth can unravel injustice in the most unexpected ways. What led to this moment? How did the driver stay calm under pressure, knowing he held the ultimate proof? And what will happen when the truth comes to light? Stay tuned, because this story is about to reveal the power of persistence, courage, and the fight for justice in a way you won't forget. The driver had always been careful, knowing that his life wasn't always judged by the same rules as others. On this particular day, he was calm as the officer approached his window, asking for his license and registration. But something felt off. The officer's tone was sharp, his questions overly probing. Then came the moment that changed everything. A small bag appeared out of nowhere, casually dropped by the officer into the car. The driver's heart raced, but he didn't let it show. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew something the officer didn't. A hidden camera was recording every second. What the officer didn't realize was that the driver had been working with federal investigators, helping to expose corruption. This wasn't just about him. It was about uncovering a larger pattern of abuse. As the officer continued his routine, the driver silently wondered, would justice finally be served? As the officer walked back to his patrol car, the driver sat frozen, processing what had just happened. His mind raced through the possibilities. What if the recording wasn't clear enough? What if this wasn't enough to prove his innocence? He knew how these situations often played out. Even with the truth on his side, the odds felt stacked against him. Yet he stayed calm, knowing that every word, every movement he made could either help or hurt his case. Meanwhile, the officer returned, this time with backup. The driver watched as another officer approached the car, seemingly unaware of the planted evidence, but quick to follow protocol. The tension thickened as the two officers began searching the car, their demeanor stern. To an outsider, it would look like a routine search. But the driver knew the truth. Across town, the federal agents monitoring the investigation waited for his call. They had been building their case for months, gathering evidence on corruption and abuse of power in this precinct. This wasn't just about one traffic stop. It was about a larger system that had gone unchecked for too long. Every second felt like an eternity, but the driver knew he had to play this smart. All he could do now was wait, holding on to the one thing that might save him: the truth. The search intensified as the officers rifled through the car, their movements calculated and deliberate. The driver stayed still, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. He couldn't afford to react, not yet. One of the officers suddenly called out, holding up the planted bag like a trophy. The driver felt his chest tighten as the other officer smirked, already beginning to speak into his radio. It was clear they were setting the stage to charge him. But what the officers didn't know was that the driver's hidden camera had captured everything, the moment the evidence appeared, the careless manner in which it was planted. He kept his expression neutral, but inside he was counting every second until he could contact the federal investigators. The situation escalated quickly. One officer demanded the driver step out of the car, his voice firm and commanding. Nearby, a small crowd began to gather, their murmurs adding to the tension. The driver's mind raced. Should he reveal the recording now, or wait until he was safely out of their reach? He had to think fast. One wrong move could change everything. The officer's tone grew harsher, insisting that the driver comply. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. But he knew this was bigger than himself. He was standing on the edge of a decision that could expose the corruption for good, or put him in even more danger. As the driver stepped out of the car, his mind churned with the weight of the moment. The officers began to lead him toward the patrol car, their grip firm, their actions practiced. The small crowd on the sidewalk grew more curious, some even pulling out their phones to record what they could. But the driver stayed silent, clutching onto the one piece of leverage he had, the recording that could expose everything. Just as he was about to be placed in the back seat, a second patrol car pulled up. Out stepped a plainclothes officer, someone who seemed higher up in rank. The mood shifted instantly. The officers who had been so confident moments ago now exchanged uneasy glances. The plainclothes officer walked over, speaking in a low, stern tone that the driver couldn't quite make out. Then came the twist. The plainclothes officer turned to the driver and asked, almost casually, "Are you ready to hand it over?" The driver froze for a second, his mind racing. How did this officer know about the recording? Was this someone involved in the investigation, or someone trying to cover it up? The officers who had planted the evidence looked visibly nervous now, their confidence draining as the situation grew more complicated. The driver had no choice but to play along, keeping his calm exterior intact. He reached into his pocket, pretending to adjust his phone, while his thoughts raced faster than ever. Who could he trust in this moment? Was the plainclothes officer there to help, or to make sure the truth never came out? The stakes had just skyrocketed, and he realized that the fight for justice was far from over. The driver looked at the plainclothes officer, his face unreadable, and slowly pulled his phone out of his pocket. The officers who had planted the evidence stiffened, their unease now visible. The crowd nearby murmured louder, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. As the driver unlocked his phone, he hesitated for a split second, weighing his options. He opened the recording, turned the screen toward the plainclothes officer, and pressed play. The moment the audio and video started, the officer's expression changed. The recording was clear, capturing the exact moment the planted evidence was dropped into the car. The officer glanced sharply at the two officers standing nearby, their faces now pale with panic. "You've got to be kidding me," the plainclothes officer muttered, shaking his head. Then, in a swift motion, he turned to the corrupt officers and instructed them to step aside. But the twist came when the plainclothes officer leaned in and whispered to the driver, "I'm part of the federal investigation. We've been waiting for this moment." Relief washed over the driver, though he kept his composure. The two corrupt officers were cuffed on the spot, their protests drowned out by the crowd, which had erupted in cheers and shock. As the driver watched the scene unfold, the plainclothes officer assured him that his bravery had been the final piece of the puzzle in exposing a web of corruption. But just as he thought it was over, the plainclothes officer added quietly, "This goes higher than these two. Stay alert, we may need you again." It wasn't the ending the driver expected, but it was a step toward justice, and he knew his fight wasn't over yet. As the corrupt officers were taken away, the driver finally felt the weight lift from his shoulders. For months, he had been living with the knowledge that his every move could either expose the truth or put him in danger. Now, standing in the aftermath of it all, he realized his courage had made a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by the same system. The plainclothes officer thanked him quietly, promising that the investigation would lead to real change. Though the driver was relieved, the officer's warning stayed with him. Corruption like this didn't end with a single arrest. It was part of a larger problem that would take time and persistence to dismantle. As he drove away, the driver glanced at the recording still saved on his phone. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was proof of what could happen when people stood up for justice, even in the face of fear. And while this chapter of his story was over, he knew there was more work to be done. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of peace, knowing he had helped shine a light where it was needed most.